Hello, and welcome back to another one of my Fallout 4 videos. Usually I deal with a matter of creative projects in this game, especially settlements. Building settlements consumes like many hours of my time, but I also started out just playing the game on its own. And of course, I enjoyed what the creative narrative gave us, such as the story, the characters, and the sort of character I can create for myself. It allows us to be enveloped in the scenery, imagery, and the themes within. This brings me to today's topic, the Institute. Many try to argue whether the Institute could be considered as an evil organization, or even if it has any real value to offer to the Commonwealth as a whole. Today, I will touch on the topic of evil, but only as a side matter. I'm more interested in the symbolic role of the Institute as it pertains to matters of overall theme in Fallout 4. This means references to the Institute in Fallout 3 simply won't be taken into account. Throughout Fallout 4, the overall aesthetic incorporates a wide variety of symbolism reminiscent of the American Revolution. For some, this goes without saying, as the setting is in the Boston area, including such places as Lexington. Over one place, Sanctuary Hills, this alludes to the Minutemen and references a real-world bridge from the time period, depicted in the game as broken, of course. Flags, posters, statues, buildings are all still standing, despite the devastation upon the land, almost as if they're invulnerable to decay or time. This is a game mechanic to be sure, but it's done clearly with the intention to put us players in a time and place that acts as a foundation for the story narrative. For our purposes, we're supposed to view the Commonwealth as a place that's very much pre-revolution until the arrival of the sole survivor. From the Minutemen themselves and their antiquated looking weapons, to the posters that depicted the vision of the colonies, things look out of place for a reason. In many ways, the players have gone back in time instead of forward after the dropping of the bombs, and it's less futuristic in that sense. The sole survivor even comments as such upon meeting Preston Garvey, that things seem to be going back in time. It's extremely common to see the British depicted as obvious bad guys in many fictions, especially during the colonial era, the golden age of piracy and other periods. It's a common trope to have the British essentially be copied in the likes of many evil empires as quick shorthand, an easy template to allow our imaginations to make sense of certain fantasy or science fiction villains. So what's the point in Fallout? Considering that we have this revolutionary theme, British archetype actually fits rather well. If there's a revolutionary movement, somebody must fill the boots of the empire itself. The seeming lack of this force leaves behind a kind of void that some players have likely filled in on their own. Hence the various debates on who's the real evil faction in the Commonwealth. Here's where I make my case. True counterforce is represented by the Institute and its sins. If true, this makes the Institute the symbolic equivalent of empire. Specifically, the Institute is the British Empire circa 1776. It is of no consequence that the revolutionary imagery is present from where the player first makes their journey outside of Sanctuary. Concord is where the player first meets Preston, the last remaining member of the Minutemen. This place is in a museum dedicated to the Revolutionary War, with speakers playing pre-recorded dialogue written from the period, such as no taxation without representation. I believe that this isn't a coincidence either, and this is meant to first install the player a sense of what the Commonwealth is being put up against. Anyone who has learned about the Revolution would recall events like the Boston Tea Party. Even those who do not might gain a sense of a cyclical arc of revolution and change that allows the wasteland to reflect the history before the American nation. We have the Minutemen themselves, a sort of force that's out of time. The sole survivor too acts as a revolutionary figure, perhaps a callback to George Washington, who was a leader who was dedicated to tying a loose group of people together under one ideal, if not one flag. In the real world, those people fought against the most powerful empire of their age, the British. The British Empire was once a global spanning force, imposing its power via the ingenuity of their navy and the might of their ideology. While much of the revolutionary figures of America are romanticized, there remains a bedrock of truth to it all. The Founding Fathers called for a new republic to be formed in the wake of failed negotiations with the British Emperor, the King of England at the time, King George III. Symbolically, this could be compared to the first failed attempt at bringing the Commonwealth together in Fallout 4. This was destroyed by the Institute as mentioned by the synth Nick Valentine. I believe that the call to arms that occurred during the American Revolution is mirrored in the rise of the Minutemen in Fallout 4 as a reaction to the Institute. Collectively, the people of the Commonwealth have a case to make against the Institute. There's no direct comparison to be made to a Declaration of Independence being written, but the collective attitudes towards the Institute can remind us of the sentiments held by the Americans against the British occupiers running up to and during the war. The British had no reservations about seizing property from Americans and considering it to be the property of the king. This even leads to a pre-revolutionary event known as the Pine Tree Riot, when local men seized control of a town to protest the law which made it illegal to cut down trees of a certain size. Other than that, the abuses alleged against the British are very significant. But another significant event is the use of the British to take people by force to join their navy. This occurred more later than the Revolution during the War of 1812, but conscription did also occur during the Revolutionary era. Now compare these notes from the Revolutionary to the Institute. What are two behaviors that the Institute is known for? The sole survivor can question the head of the Facilities Division of the Institute, Ali Fillmore. She explains that the Institute attempts to serve its energy interests in the best way possible, but from time to time will appropriate energy from the surface. It means that the Institute is not shy from taking from the people of the surface, seeing them as disposable, in the same vein as the British once saw the so-called colonists. The Institute is said to have used violent measures to seize what they wanted, laying waste to those who resisted. It's true that the Institute and its leaders saw the surface world as irrelevant to their aims. To this point, the Institute don't see the people above as having rights or needing representation, so any collective action would be seen as a potential threat to their power and hegemony. The British presence in America was a governing force that was both distant and local at the same time. The people had self-governments and for the most part established each territory or state on their own, with one notable exception of Georgia. The British existed far from mainland colonies, too far for capable representation to be established for the people of the colonies, being that the fastest method of communication was via ship. Meanwhile, local laws were often subdued in favor of the empire. There was always a distant king who threatened the security of the people. The Institute enjoys that same position. They don't govern the Commonwealth in the same way, but their presence has infiltrated into facets of rural life and those of the strongest remnants of civilization. The leader of Diamond City is a synth, and so is the head of at least one settlement that can be encountered. The act of replacing humans with synths is very symbolic of the British attitudes towards colonization across their many administrative districts and colonies, especially that of America and later on in India. It is especially telling that a great many NPCs within the game are clearly against the Institute. They're more of an established enemy of civilization than ghouls, super mutants, or even raider gangs. If one can see the Institute as the British, then the later collectives are perhaps the equivalent of Native Americans who were once viewed as threats to the colonists, but at the periphery of their existence. We also have Hancock, a man who literally dresses in the clothes of the revolutionary figure John Hancock. This allows the narrative to relate itself to the Declaration of Independence in some manner. His town, Good Neighbor, evokes pre-revolutionary towns in the name alone. It is his speech, though, that galvanizes his people to action. He calls the Institute a primary enemy of the Commonwealth. Another ally of the sole survivor is a reporter named Piper. Her role as reporter is challenged by the weight of the authority of Diamond City, which we already established is under the secret control of the Institute. Calling back to a real revolution, during the years leading up to it, the British jailed people who spoke out against the king and threatened to silence them through various methods. Now one might decide that there's a case to be made for calling the Brotherhood of Steel a symbolically colonial. This could be determined by seeing their desire to appropriate resources from people, their tendencies towards violence, or their own use of airships to expand their authority in a very British manner. I believe that the Brotherhood best embodies the French Empire instead. My case is that the Institute is beyond the reach of the Commonwealth, but is still inherently from the region. It is where the old Institute had been built, so it stands to reason that Father's Institute couldn't have been built anywhere else. It is similar to the idea of colony, that based a lot of what the pre-revolutionary United States had been remembered for. The French, like the Brotherhood, used their military might against a common enemy. They are inherently outsiders, coming in with the stated intent of liberating a land. The Brotherhood possesses a rivalry with the Institute and technology that's similar in concept to the French and British empires during the Revolutionary period. Furthermore, upon victory, the Brotherhood appears to be looking outward toward its future beyond the Commonwealth, reminding the player that they're essentially a foreign force that came only to aid in destroying the Institute. Ultimately, I believe the canon of Fallout 4 likely incorporates the defeat of the Institute. If that's not the case, I believe little changes in my argument, but it is a focused reminder that the British failed to remain in possession of their former territories in the Americas forever, despite their technological advancements. Just looking at the United States alone, its destruction is highly symbolic of the final British surrender, and when it's all added up, the downfall of the Institute's control gives the world a similar sense of change that came when the American Republic was established, a necessary transition from colony, empire, and monarchy to self-governance. That wraps up my short essay I had written. While this critical analysis makes the most sense to me now, I am open to many other interpretations of the Institute and how it fits into the aesthetic of Fallout 4. I don't think the Institute is entirely evil. Even the British weren't fully evil and hadn't considered themselves as such in the past. The Institute merely fills a role that ties it well in a central theme. Now, this analogy doesn't go on forever. The Minuteman victory doesn't mean a game is pushing an alternative history where the United States won the war on its own. An Institute victory doesn't necessarily mean the history where the British won the war. In certain contexts, the analogy works as part of a coherent theme. Maybe it is supposed to make us think of these themes while playing the game. After all, the central theme here is war never changes.